All right, everybody, welcome to the Lane and Laney podcast. All the things with Lane and Laney.
Wow, you really screwed that one up.
Excited. Doing our best to bring you awesome guests, and I think today is going to be no different. Our next guest is a former UFC fighter, an Ohio guy who got his start with the UFC through the screening show called The Ultimate Fighter. He fought in the middleweight division, and for those of you who don't know, that is the 185-pound class. He's also fought for or has been a part of several different fighting leagues, including King of the Cage, Bellator, Ultimate Victory Challenge, Extreme Fighting Organization, and in the Ultimate Victory Challenge, I believe he was the inaugural middleweight champion. If I'm not correct, he'll correct me on that. But we'll just get started in with him. Please welcome to the podcast, Mr. Luke Zachrich.
Hey, Luke. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Did I get all those right?
It's been a long time in the coming, I believe. I think so.
Okay.
The ones that matter, yes.
The ones that matter. So what are you up to nowadays? You used to be a fighter. Now what are you up to?
So I didn't know what I was going to do once that, I got to a point where I was, I think 35 when I had my last fight. And at 33, I'm like, I'm kind of a dinosaur at this point. I knew my career was going to have to come to an end at some point. It's funny to say now, but 32, 33 years old, I mean, you're getting old, and the mixed martial arts are just combat sports professions. So when I got cut by the UFC unexpectedly, it was one of those like, oh shit moments. Like, okay, what are you going to do next? So I had, my family and I had started some restaurants in Columbus, and I knew like, this is not for me long-term. Like, I'm not going to go, I don't want to do that. So I started kind of putting some feelers out. Knew I wanted to get into some sort of, I knew I wanted to get into med device sales, but I didn't know what med device sales was at the time. I just knew that I had some friends that were fairly successful doing that and had some pretty good careers and made decent money. But I still kind of had that passion for combat sports. So I had always wanted to box professionally, but never really had an opportunity. I was always limited by contracts or something like that, where I couldn't go fight for someone else, or couldn't do like a cross sport, go from mixed martial arts to boxing. So when I got caught, it's like, all right, I'm not going to really try to work my way back to the UFC. I've been there, done that. Like, I'm old. I don't need to, put my body through that to go fight on the regional scale. So I attempted to make a run in pro boxing. And as I was doing this, I got a sales job selling fitness equipment just to build a resume. I mean, here I am 35 and I really don't have a resume, just because my whole professional career, or my adult life, had been spent in combat sports. So I did this selling fitness equipment for a company called Legend Fitness, and I was boxing basically full time and putting, the effort and going and working when I had to. But for the most part, I was still boxing. So I did that for about a year and a half. And then I could not get fights anymore. Like, nobody would fight me because the commissions were so, here I have, 20 professional mixed martial arts fights, or 20 plus. And they'd make me fight guys that were like on the same scale as me from a boxing perspective. So I was, 0-0. I had to fight somebody that's 0-0. 1-0, they'll still give you that 0-0 guy, or 2-0 or something like that. But it got to a point where I'm finishing fights and having some success, and then no one wanted to actually, fight a guy with 20 professional fights or 20
Of course
plus.
not.
Yeah, so that dried up pretty quickly, and my hopes and aspirations of winning a world title in boxing kind of faded away in a sense. So developed a sales resume, and decided it was time to try to make a switch, and got into med device. And it was a brutal process, but I got there, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
Okay. Let's say I kind of share your woes in the medical device sales business. I was a personal trainer for about 15 years with a bachelor's degree in kinesiology, just thinking maybe I'd just walk right into the medical device sales door. And no, it was the biggest pain in the dick I've ever done. And ended up not getting in. So
when I did the fitness thing, or when I was selling like the strength training equipment, I literally saw a job posting for it. I sent the national sales manager an email that night, and I basically had a job the next day. I'm like, oh, this is great. Like, you just tell me you're an athlete, and
Yeah.
you've got somewhat of a personality. And yeah, I got that job, and then I'm like, it's going to be easy for a med device, and it was a pretty brutal process to get into the industry. So they always say if you can get into the first one, then it's a little bit easier moving forward once you have that on your resume. But I didn't think it was ever going to happen in a sense.
Okay. So when you were fighting, what gym or group did you fight with?
So I traveled all over the place. So it was weird. Like back when I first started, like I was training when I was in college, even though the sport didn't really exist. You know, I was boxing. We put some wrestling mats in my house. I'd meet some guys along the way. There was no mixed martial arts gym at the time. Like you'd have to go to, there was like 2 jiu-jitsu gyms in the whole entire state. So most people just, you know, would find a group of guys and they're trying to teach each other stuff. But started in Bowling Green. There was no, like, the Ultimate Fighter hadn't even like came out yet at this point. That's when the sport blew up. So like my aspirations to be a fighter, it was more of a, hey, the football thing didn't work out. This is kind of a fun fitness alternative. Like, so I started doing it. Next thing you know, like skill levels taking off, did a couple fights. The Ultimate Fighter comes out and it literally like blew up. Now all of a sudden it's like, hey, there's more fight opportunities or stuff like this. Well, I started off, the first camp I was a part of was Dan Severn's in Coldwater, Michigan. So yeah, so UFC Hall of Famer. And I didn't really know shit, but I started going up to Dan's a couple days a week training with him. Still no aspirations of doing what I did in my career. It was just kind of fun, and I was young and didn't really have anything else to do at the time. Went from Dan's kind of half-assing it in a sense. Like I was dedicated to it, but I wasn't like, hey, this is going to be a career that I'm going to do for 10 plus years, right? It was one of those things like, it's still in the time, I'm learning something new, I'm in awesome shape. And then I'm skipping a lot of things, but I went from Dan's to my strength and conditioning coach that I met. I was driving back and forth from Coldwater to Toledo. He was friends with Rich Franklin's strength and conditioning coach. And they set it up where I could go down and train with Rich. This is right after he lost the title with to Anderson Silva. So I get a call to come down and train. Rich didn't even show up that day. He was coming off the fractured nose still. Went down, saw the gym. It was like the first time I'd been in like a real mixed martial arts gym besides Severn's, which is more of a wrestling, like not pro wrestling, but amateur wrestling. He had a little bit of everything. Went down, made some friends, like, you need to come down, Luke, you need to move down here. And I moved down the next day. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, so it was like I was a vagabond or a gypsy for my first couple of years. I'd literally just kind of go with the flow. Spent some time out in Las Vegas, lived out there for a summer training. Yeah, but I spent the majority of my career at George Gurgel's team in Cincinnati when they were kind of one of the best teams in the world at that point. You know, we had guys floating in all the time. You get Militich guys like Tim Sylvia and Matt Hughes, like all the big guys who were all champions at the time. And you had Rich, George Gurgel, Dustin Hazlett, Matt Brown, and I were there at the same time. Neither one of us were anything when we first started down there. We just, you know, kind of built ourselves up. Dorian Price, I mean, you name it, like the group of guys that were there at the time was incredible. And then stuff changed. Rich started going out to Seattle. George started going out to Boston. The team kind of fell apart in a sense. So I started going out to California and doing training camps. Like, this is stupid. So I moved to Columbus. And I was still training, but I was coming off of an injury. And I was like, all right, what are we going to do here? Are we going to continue this thing or not? And randomly by chance, like some stuff happened at the jiu-jitsu gym that I was at. And I kind of got forced to open Ronin Training Center. It's the gym that I started back in, I don't even remember what year it was, maybe 2011. So I started a gym and built it into basically a powerhouse in the state or the Midwest or something like that. So yeah, so I went from Severn's to George Gurgel to Columbus, and then started Ronin Training Center.
So I say Dan Severn's a legend only because that's, you know, the first UFC started around him, but the man had bowling ball sized hands, didn't he?
And a watermelon for a head.
So he had a big melon too. The only thing that broke it up was the mustache. But yeah, I hear that Matt Brown's still fighting.
Yeah, so I mean, he is. Yeah, he started his own gym a couple of years ago in Columbus, and since I've been out of the sport, I don't really keep track of anybody anymore. I don't watch a lot of the fights. I'll watch the big ones, but yeah, I believe he's got a gym and he's building up a pretty good team here and whatnot.
Oh, so say, is that how normally it works? Is that, you know, I mean, it's different with the different athletes and things like that, but you get done training, you're just kind of, you're over it. You don't really talk to your mates anymore, more or less, teammates, fighting, sparring partners.
Yeah, some people stick around. You know, I went through that like kind of moral battle of like I've developed this incredible skill set and my body fell apart. So do I pass on what I've learned in my skill set and my knowledge? Do I kind of pass that on to the next generation? Or do I get out of it completely? And I attempted to for a second. Like I was really interested in like taking, you know, I still owned the gym at the time. And it's like, all right, do I take what I've learned and really try to develop myself into a, you know, top tier coach at the time? And I tried it for a little bit and it wasn't for me. You know, I put like my heart and soul into everything that I did. And I was working, it's just like, you know, coaching might just not be my forte. Plus I had aspirations to make a lot more money in a sense. And that's kind of, don't get me wrong, there's guys that are very, very successful in that sport, but it takes a long time and the right athletes to develop into that champion or the contender status where you're actually like seeing something off of it, you know? So got burned out, you could say, and decided to completely get out of the sport and took a break from it and didn't basically even walk in the gym unless I was taking my kids in for the longest time just so they could do jiu-jitsu. But yeah, so, and then I started training again and body's finally starting to come back together a little bit. And I'm hopefully over the the massive injuries that I've dealt with.
Let's say you touched on a couple of different subjects that we were going to ask you about, but how about, can you explain to us the months that you had put into the training, and or how did you get acknowledged to be put into the Ultimate Fighter?
So there's a couple ways to get into the UFC or the Ultimate Fighter. So like for me, the TV show, correct? That's what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that at the time, like, you know, I think they've got over 20 seasons. I was on season 7 and it was one of those things like you have to have the right management. UFC has to offer, you know, you have to be a guy on their radar in a sense early on. Like it was kind of pre-selected. The tryouts really didn't do anything for anybody. Me, I had gotten offered a fight in the UFC prior to the Ultimate Fighter. There was, I don't expect, this old guy, his name's Joe Dorkson's a Canadian guy. Was having visa issues and he was supposed to fight Ed Herman, who I believe won Ultimate Fighter 2.
Yeah.
So they called me up for a last minute replacement. I accepted the fight. Dorkson's visa went through like on 5 days notice or something like that. So I got pulled off of that, but because I said yes, they're like, you're basically a shoo-in, your season's coming up, your weight class is coming up on the next Ultimate Fighter, you're basically a shoo-in for that. So that accepting that offer is what helped me kind of elevate myself to get put right at the top of the radar for my weight class when tough came around.
So say, so had you not had that strange opportunity, how long do you think it would have taken you if you would have gotten noticed? I mean, what's the normal?
So the Ultimate Fighter is weird and it's changed drastically over the years, right? Like when they did the first, say, seasons 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, they kind of have guys on their radar, but they do a tryout process and people have to send videos in. And then I can't remember what season it was where you actually had to go to Vegas and actually do a tryout, or they do them in like New York or California or something. They do these space tryouts. I was lucky enough to I went through the process, but I was already kind of pre-selected in a sense, or had a really good shot of making it on. Then there's guys that just show up at a tryout and they've got this like outlandish personality. They know they'd be good for TV. They've got a credible fight record or background in a sense. So it's really kind of a run of the mill. And then you look at like their staple guys, because you're always going to have, one or two guys that have a really built up record or have been in UFC already, or they're trying to build their career back up. And it's like, how would his personality mesh with the other guys? Like, are they, so it's a reality TV show. And I don't know shit about reality TV, except it was the best, worst experience of my life. And, so it's kind of up to the show's directors or creators to kind of fill the gap on who is going to drive each other crazy enough in a house for 7 weeks.
I said, I bet the whole driving force is entertainment. I mean, I'm sure they're trying to weed out and find some different talent to put actually in the cage, but I'm sure that a lot of it is for ratings, and you're putting a Chris Lieben in there or a Josh Koscheck in there. They're great fighters, but they can be dicks and they can get kind of outrageous. And so I don't remember who you actually had in your house. You were on Team Forrest, right?
Yeah. So guys,
Laney's
kind
favorite.
of memorable personalities. So Tim Crater was there. Matt Brown was on my season as well. A guy by the name of Matt Riddle, who is actually a professional wrestler right now. Had a good UFC career. Dante, kid from New Jersey, was really good. There was some really good talent there. Dan Kramer was there. I think he fought for a title in Bellator at one point, or he was like right up there in the number 1, number 2 contender status. But we had a stacked season when I was on. But yeah, just to kind of go along the lines of how it's all about entertainment. So it's funny, you're stuck. Like you have no outside communication whatsoever.
Yeah.
You can't read magazines. You can't watch TV. Super Bowl was on. We were there. Had no idea who won the Super Bowl. But they will, if you want food, if I want a steak or chicken or something like that for tomorrow's meals, it's a 24-hour process. Like not 24, but you fill a list out. It's got to be done by 11 o'clock at night. And then at some point the next day, they go get the groceries and bring them all back for you. But if I want a bottle of tequila or a beer bong or a keg of beer or something like that, they'll have it there in 5 minutes. Like they want everyone to get shit-faced, so it creates good TV.
Yeah.
So it's funny, like your first like week or 2 weeks in the house, no one's really fought yet, or like maybe 1 or 2 fights have happened. So like you have all these guys that like their dream is coming true. They're fighting, for a UFC contract. Everyone's laser focused, training their asses off, trying to sleep, not fucking around. And then a guy loses a fight. Well, now all of a sudden he doesn't have any reason to be there anymore, and he's bored out of his mind. It's not bad when one guy loses a fight. When the second guy loses a fight, all of a sudden you have 2 guys there, and now all of a sudden they're drinking. But it's not bad because there's only 2 of them, and you've got 14 other guys that are still competing, so they're still in line. But as the fights continue to happen, and next thing you know, there's 5, 6, 7, 8 guys that have lost fights. It turns into a total shit show the whole entire house. It's like a frat party with 0 girls.
So do those guys still have a chance? I always wondered that. I mean, you've seen a lot of guys go through the show and then you never see them or hear from them again. Then you see other guys that either go back to their gym and prove themselves or,
Yeah, while you're actually on the show, like you always have an opportunity to be a replacement. If someone gets hurt in training, it might have happened once in 20 some seasons that they've had. And then you always have an opportunity to fight on the finale. Right. So like everybody usually they don't do it anymore, but if you made it onto the show and actually everyone would fight the finale. So you get a chance to like actually prove yourself when do your own training camp, you're working with your trainers, your own training partners, like the camp is catered towards you. When you're in the house, there's 8 guys on the team and nobody gives a shit about the guy next to them. All they care about is themselves. So it's not really the most like conducive training environment. In a sense, as it goes along and guys are kind of working their way through the bracket, and there might only be 1 or 2 guys per team, then starts to get a little more catered, but it's still not your own personal coaches that, know you. It's, you have a 7-week window to kind of develop those relationships and learn each other's styles and really know how to best pre-plan for a person's camp or strategy for a fight and whatnot.
I was gonna say,
So on there, since Forrest was your coach and he's one of my favorites, I just
obviously
wonder,
love
like,
that.
was he there a lot with you actually training, or I mean?
Yeah,
did you
so,
do a lot of
so it was a cool, like, out of the personalities in the sport, it was Forrest Griffin and Rampage Jackson, and Forrest was still
Oh.
like, both of them were like absolute superstars at the point. Forrest was just coming off of a shoulder surgery, and Rampage was about 50 pounds overweight, and they're getting ready. But like, Forrest is a psychopath. Like, I really, really like him. But our team, like, it turned into basically a mini training camp for Forrest's title fight against Rampage for Forrest, not about anybody else. So he's coming off I think it was a labral repair in his shoulder. So he trained us so hard that, like, everyone's body started falling apart like 3 weeks into it. Like, the Rampage's team, like, these guys would get off the vans. You'd have a passenger van for each one. Like, what's it, 15 people or something like that. And those guys would get out of the van and be laughing and, run right to the pool, and everybody's dicking off. Our guys, we would get in the van, and it was like a 20-minute drive back to the house. And I shit you not, like, nobody would say a word for the first 10 minutes. Like, it was just like, what the fuck am I doing here? Like, it was rough. And then all of a sudden someone would be like, what are we doing? Like, I can't move. Like, but it was a very, very intense training environment being on Forrest's team.
Okay.
And to answer your question, he never missed a practice. He was there every single one and did every single workout with us. Like, he wasn't there as a coach. Like, he was an athlete the whole entire time.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
So you still believe or still take from the whole entire industry and or sport that it's more or less a self-centered, I'm not going to say egotistical, but it's more, I got to get mine. It's all about me. You feel like it's that versus, I mean, it kind of has to be, but
it's not always like that. But the guys that are very successful, I tell people a lot, like, obviously I have multiple downfalls around my career, but I was never a self-centered, like, I cared about everybody else, right? But the guys that I've personally been around that were very successful and, fought for that, whether top contender or titles and whatnot, it was all about them, and they didn't give a shit about anybody else. That was kind of my take as I look back on my personal experiences. Now, take in mind, I've not been a part of, other camps, like you guys know, where I've trained, who I've trained with. But I feel like I've been around enough to kind of get a decent look. But I just know with my personal experiences, the guys that are very selfish are the ones that have been very successful.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, if you're concerned about your training partner, I just hurt him or whatever, you got to be thinking, well, give me somebody else. I got to focus on my goals and my dreams. So that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yep. So it's an interesting world, that's for sure.
Yeah. So you're officially retired.
I haven't made a notice of this, but I think people are starting to get the hint. I haven't fought since 2016. So I think people probably understand that I'm officially retired.
So when you say that, do you mean that people are still calling you saying, hey, we got somebody that we think you'd be good to match up against? Or
I've gotten calls over the years and instantly shot it down. I'd still, it gets harder every year, but I still kind of have aspirations to do it one more time. Maybe not mixed martial arts, just because my professional career is so demanding at this point. I don't have the time to put into training, but I do think it would be fun to box one more time. And at this point, with having a 5-year layoff, I think I could probably get a fight or two. So, but that's my own ego talking. I probably will never fight again.
there's the body and then there's the brain, so.
Exactly. I'm going to be 40 this year, and I have the body of a 75-year-old. So.
All right. Yeah. You said it. I didn't bring it up, but you brought up the age.
We weren't supposed to say it.
That's
we weren't supposed to talk about it.
No, you're good. I'm not. I'm still in my 30s.
So, as a fighter, would you say that your style was more a grappler, or did you like to stand up more?
So early on, this is kind of a fun question all the time because early on, when I boxed when I was in college, so like I'm like, okay, I'm a striker
Yeah.
because I know how to box, even though I probably wasn't that good at the time. And then it's evolved throughout like my career, right? Like you do something long enough and you have good enough coaches. Like I went from being a very good striker. I lived in Vegas for a summer with Master Toddy. He's a he's not even here in the States anymore, but he's a world class Muay Thai coach. So I went from a boxer to now I'm a kickboxer. And then I start meeting, when I moved to Columbus was when I really started focusing on my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I mean, I won a lot of fights by submission at that point, but I was still kind of consider myself a striker. And then I moved to Columbus and I basically dedicated like my life to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now all of a sudden I'm a grappler, right? And then I meet Colin Baumgartner, who's a former professional boxer here in Columbus, and he changed me as a striker in a sense. Like he really taught me like real boxing. So now all of a sudden it's like I'm a very high level accomplished Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner, like actually like competing in jiu-jitsu. And here I am, I'm working with this coach. I'm sparring with like boxing training partners. It's like I was I guess mature enough at that point and been doing it long enough that I would truly say I was a very well-rounded fighter by the time my career was over. And that's what everyone strives to, right? Like
Yeah.
when I first started, it was you're a striker, you're a wrestler, you're a grappler. Like most people didn't even say Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because the sport was nothing in the States at that time. But yeah, I had a very kind of pretty neat like evolution to my competition style over the years.
Okay. I'll say it just popped in there as you were talking because you talked about the beginning of your career saying you're a boxer, you're going to be a stand-up guy, or you're a wrestler, you want to take them down on the ground, you want your fight to be on the ground. Is there anything in the UFC that you would change to get guys to fight more, or do you see that more as like a chess match? Because the way, I guess, I'm trying to fumble through this thought, but
I understand what you're saying. Absolutely. So,
okay.
To the untrained eye, right? When two guys are on the ground and they're, punching each other, just kind of, to, like I said, untrained. So you're just laying on top of each other. You want to see guys standing up, like banging it out in a sense. I see beauty in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu portion of it. It's so strategic and it's just like boxing is the same way. But there's so much more than someone just throwing a big shot and knocking somebody out. The footwork, the angles, setting up, the feints, whatnot. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and boxing or kickboxing are all kind of the same. It's just there's so many intricacies around it. Like I think the sport's perfect in a sense. Like I don't want to see a 20-second ground rule. I don't want to see 4 stand-ups. I wish they would let them work on the ground longer. Unless there's every once in a while you get like a very high level wrestler that's national caliber in college and goes and he's just taking guys down and laying down. Like you don't see it anymore because the sport has evolved so much since the early 2000s when I got involved in it. People are so good. Like I look at some of the amateurs now, these guys that have been training since they were 15 years old, or there's kids that my kids start when they're 3 or 4 years old. Like they start doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, I hope they never fight, but there's kids that do, right? So all of a sudden now they've been doing this for their whole lives. And then they start when they're 13 years old. And by the time they're 18 and they can have their first amateur fight, they've had 5 years of experience already.
Yeah.
They would beat the shit out of me as an early level pro if you could like take and kind of time warp that in a sense. Like the sport has just evolved. I mean, it's incredible to see where it went from the first 10 years that I was into it to now, almost 20 years later in a sense. Like it's going to be strange to see how this thing is over the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, I was wondering if it would morph into anything else. Do you miss like the olden days of the UFC when it was the striking guy versus the grappling guy, or the wrestling guy versus the guy that showed up with his boxing glove on, or dumb shit like that? Do you miss those days, or do you like this?
I like where it's at, but I do in a sense, right? Like I wish that this generation of athletes could experience like how you used to scout somebody out and how you used to game plan for someone that was, you know, I remember like I was a boxer and then I went to kickboxing or Muay Thai. And I remember my training camps, like what they were like when I like early years when I first moved down to Cincinnati, like I wasn't training to wrestle. I wasn't trying to learn how to take guys down. My wrestling practice was nothing besides defensive wrestling. So I could not get taken down and stand up and you know, try to keep the fight standing. So people don't see that anymore. Everyone is so well-rounded now that it's like, oh, he's a little bit better on the ground than he is on his feet. So I'm going to try to stay on my feet with this guy. Like it's just, it's a totally different dynamic.
Okay.
Makes sense.
That one.
So we already talked about what was the, you know, the toughest thing about being in the MMA? I mean, besides what it does to your body, obviously, but is it weight cutting or just recovery after a fight?
I would go back, right? Like I didn't ever think like, are the weight cuts tough? Like absolutely. Are they bad on your body? Absolutely. I think one thing that I always put a big focus on that never really, people didn't focus on it back then. I think in the evolution of the sport they are, but the mental training portion of it was very underappreciated, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the mental side of things, like I'm like that with everything in my life though, right? Like but that and just the injuries, like that's another thing. Like I went through, I've had 7 knee operations. I've had
Oh my God.
herniated and bulged disc in my back and my neck multiple times. Had a lot of my layoffs in my career. If you look at like down through my record, I've had terrible back issues. So yeah, so like some guys can go their whole entire career and never get hurt once. And then there's guys that were like me, guys that didn't even make it as far as I would, that potentially could have been, you know, like a top level fighter in whether it's the UFC or Bellator, just one of the top ranked guys in the world potentially, but their body didn't hold up and they never really got to shine their light in a sense. So injuries are kind of one of those things. There's guys that get injured, there's guys that don't, and I envy the guys that don't, because I unfortunately was one of the guys that did.
Yeah, say Cain Velasquez comes to mind. He's just one of those guys that, you know, goes into the gym and just kills himself and then can't fight.
Yeah, but luckily for Cain, he actually won a UFC title and was a top contender there for a very long time. And he did have a great career, but where would that guy have been, right? Like, would they be talking about Cain Velasquez as the greatest fighter ever over John Jones or an Anderson Silva if he had, you know, an extra five years in his career, or 10 more fights or something to really kind of test himself?
So you said one of the toughest parts was the mental aspect. Which part of the mental aspect were you talking about? Just saying, I got to get through this shit. I got to get through this training. I got to get prepped for that guy. I got to wrap my head around what he does. What?
Yeah, so there's so many different things on the mental side of it. But I like talking about like prior to fighting someone, right? Like I used to say, put a guy in front of me, whatever, they show me film on him, I'll look at him, I'm like, I'm gonna fucking kill this guy. Like this is a great fight for me. And then I wouldn't watch fight, like I wouldn't watch film like after the first 2 weeks of the training camp, because you know it's like out of sight, out of mind. I need to focus on myself. I already know what we need to work on here. And then like a week before the fight, I'd always start watching film again. And all of a sudden it's like I'm watching a totally different person. I'm like, wow, this guy's really good. What was I thinking? Like, this is gonna be a really tough fight. And then you kind of psych yourself out. And then it's like, no big deal, 8 weeks out or 12 weeks out or 6 weeks out, whenever you accept the fight. And then all of a sudden it's like they turn into this giant as you start getting closer and closer to the fight. And it's like, man, this guy's tough. Fuck, I've got to, this is going to be a tough one. And then all of a sudden it's like, you get there, you see him, the nerves, the anxiety. It's like, oh shit. All right. And then, you know, it's like you weigh in the night before you get there and it just kind of all disappears. And it's like, how do you deal with that? So your anxiety and your fears do not like interfere with your performance. Like that was always like a really like cool part of the training for me. And then dealing with it too. Like there's guys, I was one of them that literally thought every single time that I was going to fight, I thought I was going to die. Did I really think I was going to die? Probably not. But in my head, like I'd convinced myself I'm probably going to die in this fight. And then to actually get over that mental hump of making that walk down to the cage and stepping in there and doing it, and then being fucking crazy enough to go out and do it, you know, again, or 15 more times after that. It's like, it's a interesting, yeah, it's just it's an interesting, you know, way of life or way to look at things.
I can see how that would take a toll.
Let's say, your thoughts of dying, was it
Little bit.
literally dying, or was it just, I'm going to get my ass kicked? Oh my God, what'd I sign up for?
I don't know, like I actually thought that I was possibly gonna die, maybe get paralyzed, like, get
Jesus,
spiked
dude.
on my head,
Wow.
and, you know, fracture a vertebrae or something.
Okay, that's a positive thought to
So,
think
yeah,
about right before you
I,
fight.
you know, what's funny is I've heard of like some guys just black out or blank out, and it's just like fuck it, like let's go, like they do not care. Me, I was one of the guys, and I've had like very, very, like I won't say any names, but like high
Oh.
like championship caliber fighters, like if they're going to die. I'm like, you feel like that too? Because I definitely feel like I'm going to die every time I fight.
Huh.
Wow.
Well, that's a different aspect to look
Yeah,
at from
so,
a fighter.
oh, that's so funny. Like people that don't do it and are fans of this, like you never know the emotions that someone's going through,
Oh.
like leading up to that, right? Like it's but every single person, like I remember there was a guy fought for the title. So I'm in San Jose, and I'm out there to corner Matt Brown, and Stephan Bonner was on the card. We're sharing a locker room with him, and he's normal and fine and talking to everybody. I left. I can't remember what I did, but I was gone for like 20 minutes, and I came back. And take in mind, Stephan's nickname is the American Psycho. I thought Stephan, like, it was just some corny nickname that they came up with, right? And I came back, and I'm like looking at him, and I'm like, what the fuck happened? And I'm like, did someone in his family die, or like did he just get some bad news? Because he was like totally changed. Like he was in the zone, and it's like he was ready to cry, but he's like going through his warm-up. I'm like, man, if something happened to this guy, like his if his, you know, mom or dad or wife or kid or something like that, something happened, he probably shouldn't be warming up. And he's literally like almost like tears in his eyes as he's like hitting the mitts and getting ready to go out. And I'm like, I was so baffled by like this transformation that happened. And then he goes out and like literally fought and came back, and he was completely normal. And I find out later, like that's what Stephan does before he goes to fight. Like that's like his mentality. Like he has to put himself in a different place where he literally turns into a psychopath to go out and fight. But you don't see that stuff, right? So like from his mental perspective, that's how he deals with it. But it was one of the craziest like things that I'd ever seen in my life at that point, or at least fight life.
Well, that's interesting. Any of the fights I've ever been in my life, with all just street scraps or backyard, whatever they are, I always felt like I need to cry afterwards.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't think it. I look at it now as like, okay, this isn't demasculating. This, you get anybody involved in this type of matter where they're going balls out. You know.
And I always tell everybody, right? Like I'd been in street fights before. I never thought about it, right? Because it just kind of happens. There's zero thought. Like for the most part, you might get like some butterflies or something if you feel like something's gonna come up. But a street fight compared to an MMA fight, like an MMA fight's nerve wracking. Like a street fight, it just kind of happens. Like there is such a difference. I wish I could have the same mentality when I fought MMA as I would when it was a street fight, because there's just not a lot of time to think about it. You know, when you have eight weeks to think about a fight coming up, like there's some messed up stuff that can go on in your mind in that process.
Oh, that's interesting. Was there a certain fighter that you looked up to or that inspired you, and what would have been your dream matchup?
So as far as like looking up to a fighter, like I always had a massive amount of respect for Rich Franklin. And I was really like, I mean, talk about like being excited about actually getting an opportunity to train with him and then become kind of his number one training partner for a very long time. I always respected Rich from the aspect that he was a phenomenal athlete. He carried himself very well inside and outside of the cage. And that's kind of like, if you look at me throughout my career, not necessarily like, I think Rich and I, like personality wise, were a lot the same in a sense. My downfall was the shit talking and kind of the theatrics that go along with promoting fights now. Like there was a change of the guard in a sense. Like when I was in Cincinnati, you know, you looked at your champions and you had Rich and you had Matt Hughes and you had, you know, guys that like were competitors, not theatrical competitors.
Yeah.
I really appreciate guys that were like that. Towards the end of my career, when I got my second opportunity to go back and fight in the UFC, it had changed. You know, Conor McGregor was coming up at the time, and all of a sudden, like the pre-fight build-up for a fight was a lot different, right? It wasn't just like the respect and honor type of stuff. It was who can talk more shit about somebody or get under someone's skin and try to do that. Like I wish that I had that personality like Conor does, because like, I mean, it's the guy's made millions on top of millions, possibly billions of dollars. But it just wasn't me. So like I looked at Rich as like a guy that like, and he's truly he's a good person, right? And that's how I always tried to be.
Okay. Yeah, so that just goes back to your point about being selfish in the sport. You know, I hate to say it because I've always come from a team background, whether it's been track or basketball or whatever it might have been. That was, you know, you're not the only one out there, but in a UFC or, you know, a fighting situation, it's you doing the training, it's you putting your body on the line. So you got to promote yourself and or talk to yourself in such a way. To example, Conor McGregor, I mean, he's such a manifester of his own thoughts and, you know, his belief system in himself. It may have waned over the last couple of years, but in the beginning it was all about me, all about how I'm going to fight, how I'm going to do it. And so, yeah, that just goes back to your point.
And that's where, like, for me, football was always my sport, right? Like it was a team, right? Like I was captain of my team, blah, blah, blah. Like it was all about like the group. Now I wasn't ever involved in individual sports for the most part. Like I wrestled as a kid, but like I didn't do it when it really mattered. So I never had that light shine directly on me like I did in mixed martial arts. So like the thought process and, you know, I always cared about everyone else probably more than I did myself, or I cared about people probably when I should have been focusing on myself. But I mean, it is what it is, and I probably wouldn't change it, and it's paid off in other aspects of my life. So
what about a dream matchup? Do you have a dream matchup that you maybe never got a chance?
So I always had like aspirations. I wouldn't say it's a dream matchup, right? Because it really wouldn't matter like one person specifically.
Yeah.
But like when I was still competing, I was always trying to fight like the guys that were the top guys in the world. And I never had that opportunity to fight like a big time champion or a former champion. Like I thought I was going to fight Paulo Filho at one point. I accepted a fight against Robbie Lawler, like when he was in Strikeforce. Like it never happened, but I wanted that like big name marquee fight that I could be like, oh, when someone asks you like, who's some of the bigger guys you fought? Like I fought some really tough guys, but not like that guy that's like, oh my God, you know, I can't believe you fought him. Or like, you know, like having a Dan Severn on your record, or Ken Shamrock, or, you know, a Rich Franklin, like you name it. Like I always thought that would be really cool. Yeah. Or, I mean, now I don't pay much attention, but I would love to, I would love to fight like one of the Paul brothers.
Oh God.
I hate those guys.
Yeah, those guys suck. You're right. I can't stand them idiots either.
Yeah. So, but yeah, no one specific, just someone that was way better than me or had accomplished a lot more than I did. So I truly had an opportunity to test myself against one of the best in the world.
Say, when you were training with anybody, was there anybody that you just couldn't stand training with because they went balls out all the time, going for your head, going for a submission lock and not letting go? They were training basically for life.
Yeah. Throughout my career, there was always that one or two guys. And as I got older and dealt with more injuries and know what it's like to have to take a year or two off or something like that, like I got very selective on the guys that I would train with and that I wouldn't train with. but there's always that like gym killer, right? Like every single gym has it, every training camp has it, where there's like that one guy that, you know, he's fighting for his life in the gym every single day, and it sucks. Like, but yeah, they're everywhere though. So, I won't name any names. Some of them are my friends. So it's like, you're my friend, but I'm not going to train with you for this game. Sorry.
So I've always wondered this watching fights, you know, it's like this big hype for a fight, and then you know, we as fans sit there and watch it, and it's over in 2 seconds. Like, is that just a complete letdown on your end? Have you experienced that?
I have, and it's kind of mixed emotions, right?
Yeah.
I've had those where I've won, and I've had those where I've lost. The ones where you lose, like, sting, right? Because it's like you put so much into it. When I fought Dan Kelly in Australia, it was my last fight in the UFC. I mean, I flew around the world to fight this guy, right? And I just couldn't fire that day. Like, if you could be any more off in a fight, like, I was off. And it was like, he beat me right at the end of the first round or something like that. And that one has like haunted me. Just because I felt like if I could have got back to the stool, had Colin and Rob talk to me and kind of get me back into it a little bit, like, even win or lose, right? As long as like you fight like yourself or up to your potential, that was the big thing. And then I've had fights where I've gone out and I've you know, won them in like 30 seconds. And it's awesome, right? It looks really cool on your record, like, but it's like, I just trained my ass off. Like, I haven't fought 6 months or a year. Yep. And you know, like, you catch the kid really quick, and it's like, I kind of wanted to get a little more work in and at least like showcase my skills in a sense. Like, no, don't get me wrong, like, people love it, but like, I would have people come in from all over the place. Like, I'd always have, like, when I was on a regional circuit, I'd have 200 or 300 people there just to watch me fight. And it's like, man, these people came from South Carolina, or they came from Florida to watch this fight and spent a ton of money. And, you know, they get to see me fight for 30 seconds. But it was a win. And as you're trying to like work your way through the regional circuits, all that matters are wins and losses, not how you did it. And, you know, it was a positive in that sense. And it's like, all right, let's on to the next one. I walk out. Or the worst part is when you win a fight and then you fucking break your hand, which has happened to me before. And it's like, okay, I fought for 30 seconds. I got to win. And now I'm going to be off for another 6 months. And that was terrible. So.
So what about the corner, the time spent in the corner? And it always perplexes me because I'm looking at these guys. Half of them are into it. They can see what the coach is saying. You can tell they're hearing everything, but other times they're just in a funk, they're in a daze, or they're in their own head. How much advice actually comes through your head when the coaches are talking to you in the corner?
So the really good coaches, right? And this is something because I did bounce around from the athlete to the coach, and I'd have, you know, handfuls of fighters that are training alongside you that are still, and I'd go corner them for different fights and stuff. And I think I looked at it from a different perspective of an athlete's perspective. Like, you have 1 minute, you're completely exhausted. How can I relay this information that they're actually going to take it in? And I think that was the big thing for me, is like, how can I portray this? If I'm in that person's shoes, how do I want my coach to talk to me? And I think I was very fortunate. Like, I've had some really, really good coaches. Again, like Colin Baumgartner, Rob Radford, awesome guys. Like, they're phenomenal in the corner. Because you have, say you have 60 seconds, 30 seconds to catch your breath, 20 seconds to digest the information they're giving you, and 10 seconds to get up and get ready to go fight again. So you get 20 seconds. What can you say? So you've got to keep it very simple. And there's maybe 1 or 2 things that I can digest that I'm actually going to go out and be able to like implement in my strategy or my game plan and then next. So the guys that drive me nuts are the ones that you're watching on camera or something like that, and they're literally like reading paragraphs off or giving this like paragraph, and like, this guy's not going to remember a fucking thing that you just said. Like, shut up. Like, you have no business being in someone's corner. So like guys, like there's certain guys that I've like kind of brought up and have watched them as like Corey Minton's a prime example. Like he's a guy here in Columbus, and he was always like involved in every single one of my training camps from my comeback fight from when I first moved to Columbus to the very end. But like he evolved like drastically, and he became very, very like a good coach, a good cornerman. Like he's awesome, and it's because you've been around guys like Colin and me and Rob, like guys that really can like digest, and they've done it themselves too. That's important as well, is that guys that are good in the corner, a lot of times it's like you have to have actually been sitting in the athlete's shoes in a sense prior to be able to understand it, right? Like the guys that really haven't done it before, like to me it's like, okay, you're gonna have a lot longer like learning curve than someone that's actually been in the athlete's shoes and sat in the stool between rounds when they're in a tough fight.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, moving on to injuries. You said you've got a lot of spine injuries, top and bottom. Is have they all persisted? Because you hear stories or see videos of guys like Chuck Liddell that basically get assaulted by their chiropractor every day just to get them moving again. So is there anything you wake up in the morning, you're like, shit, here we go. Okay, now I'm good.
I'll tell you what. So like I was always fairly injury prone, and I think I can attribute it a lot to when I was young, right? When you're in your early 20s, like you just don't think about that stuff. It's like, I'm a fighter now. Like I've got to be tough and push through this. And then kind of carry at some point in your life that like, maybe I need to like rest and not push this, you know, and like actually like recover from it. Because I think the first time I hurt my back, I pushed through it. I mean, I remember when I fought in Bellator, I was getting ready for that tournament, and I was driving back and forth from Columbus to Cincinnati for sparring days. I'd go down and still train with George's team just on like the pro training days. And I would get down there, and I kid you not, it would take me 5 minutes to get out of my car and into the gym. And I'd start off like completely hunched over, like looking like a little old lady, like walking. And I'm looking through the head glass windows there. And I'm looking through the windows, and I'm seeing like all the guys. I'm like, oh no, he's here. Like this day's gonna suck. As I can't walk, and it's like the anxiety would get you. So it's like I've dealt like the back injuries by far have been the worst. I've had 7 knee operations, 6 on one knee. I don't have full extension in my right knee. Probably have to get that replaced. I'm hoping I don't have to get joint replacements, but the back has been the one thing that has like haunted me my whole, from when I was probably 27 years old on. It's just been even now, like I deal with it. I'm just coming off of like, I heard it at the beginning of summer, or tweaked it again, and I think I changed up all of my strength training, like started working with a physical therapist. I think, hopefully, knock on wood, that I might have figured this thing out. But yeah, back is by far the worst out of all the injuries. Like that's the one that's stuck around.
So how did you take care of yourself through your fighting days? I mean, you're standing there in a parking lot, hunched over like an old woman, knowing full well you got to go in and train for another hour or 2 hours. How the hell did you stand erect, and what did you do in between to take care of yourself?
Well, that specific situation, like showing up at George's gym, remember like talking to myself, like you're walking into the gym and it's like, oh shit, Rich is here today. Like, fuck. All right, get up. Don't be a pussy. Like, you know, you're just telling yourself like it's not as bad as it is. But like I was pretty fortunate. Like, so in Cincinnati, we had a chiropractor that worked with our team. His name was Dr. Utzler up in Middletown. He was a great guy. Like, so you go and you get your adjustments, he'd do STEM, he'd put you through different PT type stuff. So that was like good from a preventive standpoint. And then we had an orthopedic surgeon who sponsored the gym and then took care of a lot of like the athletes that were there. His name's Tim McConnell. And I always thought that setup was awesome, right? So it's like you got a chiropractor, you've got an orthopedic surgeon, like this is phenomenal. So when I moved to Columbus and I started Ronin, I'm like, we need to kind of like emulate what they have here. So like in Columbus, there's a place called Lane Avenue Chiropractor. The guy's name is Dr. Jay Valila. And he's just been amazing, like how he took care of the team, like literally like he went above and beyond. He would come to a lot of my fights need like adjustments prior, post, that way you're lined up, like ready to go. And then a couple different orthopedics. I've had a couple surgeries since I've been here, and this is prior to me getting into the orthopedic space, medical device. So like I would still go back and forth to Cincinnati if I had issues to see Tim McConnell. But yeah, it's like there was always something, and I've literally tried everything as far as different strength and conditioning like methodologies. I've done, chiropractic work, physical therapy work, like worked with surgeons, like you name it. Like I thought that I was going to be the guy to figure out like the world's biggest problem when it comes to sports injuries and like rehab type of stuff. But my body still fell apart. And yeah, if you guys figure that out, let me know. I'll pass it on to you guys.
So take me through a normal training cycle, preparing for a fight and or just training in general.
Yeah, so it always changed, right? So if there wasn't a fight coming up, I'd usually train twice a day.
Okay.
Depending on where I was at in my career, which team I was, like Columbus was always like very jiu-jitsu heavy because the jiu-jitsu is so phenomenal here. Or there'd be like a jiu-jitsu competition coming up. Like I started competing very heavily in Brazilian jiu-jitsu once I moved to Columbus. So do one grappling session, one striking session, or if my body was run down or I didn't feel like it, you do a strength and conditioning session and a jiu-jitsu session. Or some days it was just like whatever the team is doing, like that's what we're going to do. And then when it was fight time, it was very like strategic in your approach. There's always 3 sessions a day. Sometimes and it varied, right? Like depending on who you were fighting, what your coach's availability was. I'd work with Colin as much as I could. Rob would come up and actually live with me. Like my last couple fights, like he'd stay in my house for 8 weeks prior. If Rob was here, we'd go through the schedule prior to the camp actually starting. And then everything was down like on a spreadsheet to like, this is this time, this is who you're working with, training partners are all set up.
Oh, wow.
To the point where like you put all the thought process into it, like from early on when this fight is scheduled, and then you just go through the motions at that point. Everybody shows up and they're supposed to show up, but there's usually 3 sessions a day. I would say early on, I would probably train like 7 hours a day, maybe 8, because I felt like it's a full-time job. So like you need to clock in 8 hours. And then as I got older, I realized how fucking stupid I was. And then sessions like kind of minimized down to like usually about like an hour to hour and a half per session. So you're training for, I don't know, 4 hours a day, 4 to 6 hours a day, depending on what it was. And then volume either increased or decreased. So it was very like scientific in a sense.
I'll say that's pretty amazing that I think everybody in general does that. As far as age wise, you're killing yourself just doing it all. I can do it all. I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm just gonna get it for 8 hours a day. That's just nuts.
Yeah.
And as you get older, you start to economize your time a little bit, and you just, okay, this doesn't make any goddamn sense. I'm gonna do this a little differently.
It's all more is better, and then you realize that and then by the end of your career, it's like, wait, I'm in better shape, and I'm less like the injuries aren't as prevalent as they were earlier on. And then early on, it's like you're walking in to fight week and your body just feels like complete shit. You have to take basically the whole week off before a fight just to kind of recover and hope that your body is going to perform on the night of the fight.
How
So
about,
that's,
oh, go ahead.
the only problem is like you only have such a small window, right? Like that you can try to figure all of that stuff out. And then that's the good thing about some of the bigger camps, right? Like a Greg Jackson's or American Top Team is that they've got 75, high caliber, A type, B type, like fighters or caliber fighters. These guys have all done it and they've done it for the last 20 years. Like they've probably got not like, it's not cookie cutter, right? Because everybody's different, but they've probably got a pretty good cookie cutter approach to how to run a fight camp or how to put someone's like training cycle together.
Makes sense.
So after a fight, I've always wondered, we watch these fights and, some get pretty brutal and people are just like totally messed up afterwards. And I'm always like, my God, how are they going to feel tomorrow after, like, can you even get out of bed, or, you know, how soon after do you have to start training again? How long do they give you a break for?
So it all depends as far as like how soon do you start training. Like I was a psychopath. So I was usually back in the gym. If I fought on a Saturday, I'd usually come into the gym on a Monday, whether I'm just hitting the bag or bullshitting or like kind of rolling around a little bit. But there's also fights where like I remember UFC 175, like I fought a guy named Guilherme Vasconcelos. He's still in Bellator, I believe. And I clean cut him. I think I won every single round. One judge gave him the last round. But my hands were so messed up after that. Like I had water pockets from like my the tiniest knuckle all the way up into like your MCP joint. Like it was just completely fluid filled. I couldn't put my hands in my own like pockets of my jeans for 7 days afterwards.
Oh,
Like
God.
so that one took some time to recover from. And it's like, you know, there's always like little bumps and bruises where you wake up the next day and you're like, oh my God, like you can't put a hat on your head because your head hurts so bad. Like, why does my head hurt so bad? Did I get punched? Usually it was like getting your head like ground up against the cage or something, or you got elbowed in the back of the head. But like, yeah, those things sting for a little bit. So it's like, you know, the longer the fights, the longer the fights, the more bumps and bruises you have.
Yeah.
So it all depends. Like I prefer like just this is what you do, right? Like this is your career at that point. So it's like all you know is show up to the gym every single day.
Right.
And even if you're not training, like you usually get back in there right away. Most guys want to celebrate and like walk in and, you know, kind of peacock themselves a little bit. It's like, yeah, I want to talk to everybody and tell them all how great they are. I just wanted to get back in the gym and be around like my people, right? Like that was just how I always was. Whether I was training or helping someone else out, like get ready for a fight, or it's like, okay, I've got some time, like let's do the IBJJF tournament or something. Like I need to keep moving because that's my job, right? So that's what you do.
Let's say how much of that recovery time gets prolonged due to excessive celebrations after the fights.
I've had so mine was always like, because I didn't drink for like 10 years. I drink like once a year, maybe twice a year, and you like still act like you're in college and go get shit faced with your buddies. But like I literally went for like 10 years of my career where I barely drank, and then after the fights, like you go out and celebrate and have a good time. My thing was always like with the food though, right? Because you're on such a strict nutrition plan. And early on, I used to cut like a massive amount of weight. Like I'd cut down from like 215, 220 to get to 185 pounds. So like, you'd be like, all right, I'm going to give myself a week to eat whatever I want after this. And then if you weren't getting any calls or there wasn't anything coming up, it's like, all right, well, my week just turned into 4 weeks and now I'm 230 pounds. And, so that was always the hardest part, is getting back on like your nutritional plan, to where you're like really dialed in, to where your weight's as close as you can keep it without like you know, having to like really like kill yourself to actually get back to your weight class for the next fight.
As I say, we see a lot of fighters that just can't make it. They go and balloon up and they can't come back down. I mean, you think of Rampage, you think of Rumble Johnson, and I'm sure everybody's got their qualms about it, but there's just two that popped into my head.
Yeah, no, I mean, as far as like making weight for a fight, like that's completely unacceptable. Guys that like don't make their weight, like you agree on something, you've got plenty of time. The only time I'll like cut people some slack is like if they get a last minute fight and say they've got like 5 days notice and they miss by like a couple pounds. Like I don't respect it, but like I understand it in a sense. I never miss weight, and you know, one fight, never miss weight. So that's, and like Rumble Johnson, like he was one of those guys, like early on when he was still fighting at 170 pounds, had no business being there. Like just move up a weight class. Like it's not right. You know, like, or your Johnny Hendricks guys like that went through like they'd miss weight by like 5 or 6 pounds. It's like, did you even try? Like that, those guys like piss me off. I've had people miss weight for me. And it really bugged me.
Okay. Let's say, as far as your present circumstances, are you married?
I am. Yeah. 4 kids.
4
kids.
God bless you. Jesus. How old are they?
So I've got 8, 6, 4, and 1.
Good
So,
Lord.
two boys, two girls. So
2 boys and 2 girls, and you
2
said
boys, 2 girls.
they're already in jujitsu.
Yeah, yep. All Gia Storm and Nash. So my 4 to 8-year-olds they all do
Oh.
Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
And they love it.
They like it. I don't push it on them, right? Like I want them to be exposed to it. Like we go once a week usually. But I want to expose them to it at an early age. That way, if they do decide that it's something that they want to do or they want to get good at, like they've already gone through like the movement patterns, their body's kind of trained like from a mental perspective on how to move. So if they're 12 years old and decide, hey, I want to go compete in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it's like, all right, well, this is your decision, right? Like they're not going to be nervous to go into the gym. There's not going to be kids that have, years of training ahead of them at that point. So one of my like best buddies, our daughters, like Gia and his daughters Aria, like they're both 8 and almost, I think one just turned 9. Aria just turned 9, but like they've been together since they're little. So like we try to like match it up. So it's like something fun. It's like a playtime plus like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We go to the gym, they run around, they screw up. Like
Yeah.
Will and I will either train or like we'll just sit and bullshit and watch the kids. So it's fun.
That's cool.
Well, that's cool. Are you guys done having kids? 4 seems like a good number. Yeah. Well, cool, man. Hey, if anybody wants to know more about you or look you back up, I know you've been out of the fight game and kind of out of the public eye for a little while, but is there a place they can find you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really that active on social media, but I do have Instagram and Facebook and all of that stuff. I usually don't accept people, but I will just for your circumstances. I definitely have Twitter, but I don't use it. So,
Okay.
yeah, I disappeared into the darkness.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
You kind of get done with your sport and you just kind of, I'm just
On
going
to the next thing. On to the next challenge.
Yep.
Yeah. So awesome. Well, guys, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. We've
Yeah,
talked
it was
about this for a
fun.
while, so I'm glad we got to do it.
So I'm glad we
Appreciate
got to relive some of your better moments and you got to explain your lifestyle and everything. And
Yeah,
thank
it was
you for
interesting.
thank you for your contribution to the sport.
Oh, thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
All right. Well,
All right, guys.
thank you everybody for your time this time. Until next time. Thanks, Luke.
All right. Take care. Yep. Have a nice day.
You too.